On a quiet morning in June 2006, a television legend took his final breath inside the largest home in Los Angeles. Aaron Spelling, the man who had created more hours of television programming than any human being in history, died in a bedroom so vast it could have housed an entire family. His wife Candy sat beside him, surrounded by walls that had cost more to build than most people would earn in 100 lifetimes. Outside those walls, beyond the manicured gardens and the iron gates, the world would soon learn just how extraordinary this house truly was. But even those who thought they knew the Spellings would be shocked by what the mansion revealed about the man who built it, the woman who designed it, and the family that would tear itself apart fighting over its legacy. The house was called the Manor. It rose from the hills of Holmby Hills like a French chateau dropped from the sky, a monument to ambition that stretched across 4.7 acres of some of the most valuable real estate on Earth. With 56,500 square feet of living space, it contained 123 rooms, each one a statement of wealth that bordered on the unimaginable. There were bowling alleys and beauty salons, gift wrapping rooms, and humidity-controlled closets for fur storage. There was a room dedicated entirely to cutting and arranging flowers. Another existed solely for wrapping presents. The swimming pool could have swallowed a small house, and the garage held space for 100 automobiles. But to understand how this palace came to exist, we must first understand the man who dreamed it into being. Because Aaron Spelling did not inherit his fortune. He did not marry into wealth or stumble upon success by accident. He built his empire from nothing, and the story of how he did it would become the blueprint for modern television itself. Aaron Spelling was born on April the 22nd, 1923, in Dallas, Texas, to Jewish immigrant parents who had fled persecution in Europe. His father worked as a tailor, earning barely enough to keep the family fed. They lived in a cramped apartment where young Aaron shared a bed with his brother. Money was so scarce that new clothes came only once a year, and even then, they were often hand-me-downs altered by his father's careful needle. But poverty was not the only shadow that hung over Aaron's childhood. From a young age, he suffered from a mysterious illness that doctors could not explain. His legs would give out without warning. His body would shake with tremors. For nearly a year, between the ages of 8 and 9, Aaron could not walk at all. Confined to his bed, he stared at the ceiling of that tiny apartment and let his mind wander into other worlds. He invented characters. He created stories. He imagined lives far more glamorous and exciting than the one he was living. When he finally recovered, doctors told his parents that the illness had been psychosomatic, triggered by stress and anxiety. But Aaron never forgot those long months of isolation. They had given him something precious, the ability to escape into imagination, to build entire universes inside his head. It was a skill that would one day make him the most prolific storyteller in television history. As a teenager, Aaron discovered acting. He performed in school plays and local theater productions, losing himself in characters that let him be anyone other than the poor tailor's son from Dallas. When World War II erupted, he enlisted in the Army Air Forces and served as a pilot, flying missions that tested his courage and his nerves. He earned a Bronze Star for his service, but the war also left him with wounds that did not show on the surface. After returning home, Aaron headed west to California, drawn by the same dream that had pulled millions of others toward Hollywood's golden light. He arrived with almost nothing, just a few dollars in his pocket and a burning certainty that he was meant to tell stories. He took acting jobs wherever he could find them, small roles in forgettable productions that paid barely enough to cover rent. But Aaron quickly realized something that would change the trajectory of his life. He was not meant to be in front of the camera. He was meant to be behind it. The real power in Hollywood did not belong to the actors who spoke the words. It belonged to the writers who created them. He began writing scripts, selling his first one in 1954 to a Western series called Zane Grey Theater. The check was small, but the door had opened. Over the next decade, Aaron wrote for nearly every major show on television, learning the rhythms of what audiences wanted, what kept them watching, what made them come back week after week. By the early 1960s, Aaron had transitioned from writing to producing, and it was here that his genius truly emerged. He understood something that many Hollywood executives missed entirely. Television was not cinema. It did not need to be profound or challenging or artistically ambitious. It needed to be entertaining. It needed to be escapist. It needed to give ordinary people a window into extraordinary lives. In 1968, Aaron Spelling formed his own production company. The timing could not have been better. Network television was hungry for content, and Aaron was ready to feed it. His first major hit came with a show called The Mod Squad, a drama about three young outcasts who become undercover police officers. It was hip. It was relevant. It captured the spirit of a generation questioning authority. But more importantly, it proved that Aaron Spelling knew how to create television that people actually wanted to watch. Then came the 1970s, and with it, the explosion that would make Aaron Spelling a household name. In 1976, he launched a show that would define an entire era of television. Charlie's Angels featured three beautiful women working as private detectives for a mysterious boss they never saw in person. Critics dismissed it as fluff. Feminists protested its portrayal of women. But audiences could not get enough. Charlie's Angels became a cultural phenomenon, turning its stars into international celebrities and proving Aaron's theory about television. People did not tune in for intellectual stimulation. They tuned in for fantasy, for glamour, for the vicarious thrill of watching beautiful people live exciting lives. And no one understood that formula better than Aaron Spelling. The hits kept coming. The Love Boat took viewers on romantic cruises to exotic destinations. Fantasy Island offered a mystical resort where dreams came true. Each show was dismissed by critics and adored by millions. Aaron did not care what the reviews said. He cared about ratings, and ratings he delivered. By the early 1980s, Aaron Spelling was one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. His production company occupied an entire building on the 20th Century Fox lot. He had more shows on the air simultaneously than any producer in history. And his personal wealth had grown to levels that would have seemed impossible to the little boy who once lay bedridden in a Dallas apartment. It was around this time that Aaron met the woman who would become his partner in building the most extraordinary private residence in America. Her name was Carol Jean Maurer, though everyone called her Candy. She was a striking brunette with expensive tastes and ambitions that matched Aaron's own. They married in 1968, and from the beginning, their relationship was built on a shared understanding. Aaron would create the wealth, Candy would spend it, and spend it she did. But Candy Spelling was not simply a woman who liked to shop. She was a woman with a vision, a perfectionist who approached interior design and architecture with the same obsessive attention to detail that her husband brought to television production. When Aaron suggested they build a new house in the early 1980s, Candy did not think about a house. She thought about a monument. The property they chose sat in Holmby Hills, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Los Angeles, wedged between Bel Air and Beverly Hills. The land had once belonged to Bing Crosby, the legendary singer and actor, which added a layer of Hollywood history that appealed to the Spellings. But the existing structures were far too modest for what they had in mind. Everything would need to be demolished. Everything would need to be rebuilt from scratch. Candy threw herself into the project with a fervor that surprised even Aaron. She interviewed architects, rejecting one after another until she found someone willing to execute her precise vision. She wanted a French chateau, something that would look as though it had stood for centuries in the Loire Valley, before being magically transported to Southern California. Every detail had to be perfect, every room had to serve a purpose, and every purpose had to be grander than anything Los Angeles had ever seen. Construction began in 1988, and from the very first day, it became clear that this would not be an ordinary building project. Candy visited the site daily, sometimes multiple times a day, inspecting progress and demanding changes. Walls were torn down and rebuilt because the proportions did not feel quite right. Materials were shipped from Europe because nothing American would do. Custom craftsmen were flown in from France to install moldings and trim that matched the authentic chateau style Candy demanded. The workers came to dread her visits. She noticed everything: a crooked tile, a slightly uneven paint line, a doorknob that did not match the others in its hallway. Nothing escaped her eye, and nothing was acceptable until it met her impossible standards. The original construction estimate stretched from months into years. The budget, initially ambitious, began to spiral beyond all predictions. But Aaron never complained. He trusted Candy's vision, and more importantly, he could afford to indulge it. Throughout the late 1980s, his television empire continued to expand. Dynasty had become a global sensation, bringing the glamour of wealthy oil families into living rooms around the world. The show starred Joan Collins as the deliciously villainous Alexis Carrington, a character whose designer wardrobe and ruthless schemes captivated audiences from America to Australia. Dynasty was more than just a hit. It was a cultural touchstone, a show that defined the excess and ambition of the Reagan era. The characters dripped with wealth. The storylines revolved around corporate intrigue, romantic betrayal, and the endless pursuit of power. For millions of viewers, watching Dynasty was like peering through a window into a world of unimaginable luxury, and Aaron Spelling was building that world in real life. As the mansion rose from the Holmby Hills dirt, room by room and wing by wing, it began to take on a personality of its own. The main entrance featured a sweeping double staircase that would not have looked out of place in Versailles. The formal living room stretched 60 feet in length, anchored by a fireplace imported from a genuine French castle. The dining room could seat 24 guests beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than most houses. But it was the private spaces that truly revealed Candy's obsessive attention to detail. Her personal closet, if it could even be called a closet, was a 2-story cathedral to fashion. Custom-built cabinets displayed hundreds of handbags, each one in its own illuminated niche. Automated racks rotated her collection of furs so that no single coat bore the weight of hanging too long. A special room held nothing but her collection of dolls, meticulously displayed behind glass. Aaron's spaces were more modest, at least by comparison. He had a study where he could review scripts and take calls from the studio. He had a screening room where he could watch rough cuts of his shows. But Aaron was not really interested in the house the way Candy was. For him, it was simply where he lived. For her, it was the masterpiece she had spent years creating. By 1991, after nearly 3 years of construction and countless millions of dollars, the manor was finally complete. The final price tag would remain a subject of speculation for decades, with estimates ranging from $40 million to over $150 million. The true number was almost certainly somewhere in between, though the Spellings never confirmed it publicly. What could not be disputed was the scale. The manor was officially the largest private residence in Los Angeles County, a title it would hold for years to come. It was larger than the White House. It was larger than most hotels. It contained amenities that most people could not even imagine wanting, let alone affording. There was a bowling alley with 2 lanes, complete with automated pin setters and custom balls. There was a beauty salon where Candy could have her hair and makeup done without leaving home. There was a gift wrapping room stocked with papers, ribbons, and bows for every conceivable occasion. There was a humidity-controlled vault for storing furs, a temperature-controlled room for flowers, and a special space dedicated to displaying Candy's collection of silver frames. The grounds were equally extraordinary. The swimming pool was not just large, it was Olympic-sized, surrounded by cabanas and attended by staff who kept the water at precisely the right temperature year-round. The tennis court featured night lighting for evening matches. The gardens were maintained by a team of full-time landscapers who ensured that every hedge was trimmed, every flower bed was blooming, and every blade of grass was the exact same height. Inside and out, the manor was a statement. It said that Aaron and Candy Spelling had made it, not just in the Hollywood sense of success, but in a way that transcended normal measures of achievement. They had built something that would outlast their careers, their television shows, their very lives. But even as the Spellings settled into their palace, trouble was brewing. Their 2 children, Tori and Randy, had grown up surrounded by wealth that most people could not comprehend. They had attended the most exclusive schools, worn the most expensive clothes, and been given every material advantage that money could provide. But they had also grown up with parents whose attention was often focused elsewhere, on shows and scripts and business deals, and, in Candy's case, on the endless details of building and decorating. Tori, the eldest, would later write about her childhood with a mixture of affection and bewilderment. She described birthday parties that cost more than most weddings, rooms filled with toys she never played with, and a sense of isolation that no amount of luxury could cure. She loved her father deeply, describing him as kind and gentle despite his overwhelming schedule. But her relationship with her mother was complicated from the start, marked by expectations that Tori felt she could never meet. Randy, the younger child, struggled in different ways. Growing up as the son of a television legend created pressures that were difficult to escape. He would eventually pursue his own career in entertainment, but always in his father's shadow, always measured against achievements that seemed impossible to match. As the 1990s dawned, Aaron Spelling showed no signs of slowing down. He had another hit on his hands, a show that would become even more iconic than Dynasty or Charlie's Angels. It was called Beverly Hills 90210, and it would define teenage television for an entire generation. The show premiered in October of 1990, just as the manor was nearing completion. It followed a group of wealthy teenagers navigating life at a fictional high school in one of America's most affluent zip codes. The timing was perfect. Audiences were hungry for glamour, for drama, for a glimpse into lives that seemed impossibly privileged, and Aaron Spelling delivered exactly that. Beverly Hills 90210 became a phenomenon that exceeded even Aaron's wildest expectations. The young cast, including Jason Priestley, Shannon Doherty, Luke Perry, and Jenny Garth, became household names overnight. Their faces appeared on magazine covers around the world. Their storylines, tackling everything from teen pregnancy to drug abuse to the pressures of wealth, sparked conversations in living rooms across America. But there was an irony that few noticed at the time. While Aaron's show portrayed the drama and dysfunction of wealthy families in Beverly Hills, he was living an even more extravagant version of that life just a few miles away. The fictional West Beverly High could not hold a candle to the real-life opulence of the manor, and the show had another connection to the Spelling family that would prove far more personal. Tori Spelling, Aaron's daughter, was cast in a supporting role as Donna Martin, a sweet-natured girl with a famous father. Critics whispered that she had gotten the part through nepotism, a charge that would follow Tori throughout her career. But whatever the circumstances of her casting, Tori threw herself into the role with determination, eventually becoming one of the show's central characters. For Aaron, having his daughter on his most successful show must have brought a complicated mix of emotions. Pride, certainly, watching her grow as an actress season after season. But perhaps also concern, knowing how the entertainment industry could chew up and spit out even the most talented performers. He had seen it happen countless times throughout his career. He knew the price that fame could exact. Inside the manor, life continued with all the grandeur that money could provide. The Spellings hosted legendary parties that brought together the most powerful figures in Hollywood. Studio executives, A-list actors, politicians, and international celebrities all passed through those massive front doors, marveling at the scale of what the Spellings had created. The formal dining room served meals prepared by a full-time kitchen staff. The screening room showed first-run films before they reached theaters. The grounds offered enough space for elaborate garden parties, where guests could wander for hours without seeing the same view twice. Candy orchestrated these events with the same precision she had brought to building the house itself. Nothing was left to chance. The flower arrangements were refreshed daily. The silver was polished until it gleamed. The staff moved through the house like silent shadows, anticipating needs before they were expressed. To be invited to the manor was to experience hospitality on a scale that most people could only imagine. But for all its grandeur, the house also served as a kind of refuge for Aaron. As his career stretched into its fourth decade, the pressures of running a television empire never eased. Every show required attention. Every network demanded results. Every season brought new competitors eager to claim his throne. The manor offered an escape from all of that, a place where he could retreat behind gates and walls that kept the outside world at bay. He would wake early before Candy stirred and make his way to his study. There, surrounded by scripts and correspondence, he would plan his day while the rest of the house slept. He reviewed ratings reports from the previous night's broadcasts. He took calls from executives in New York. He read through pitches for new shows, searching for the next idea that might capture America's imagination. Even in his 60s, Aaron worked with an intensity that exhausted people half his age. He believed, perhaps correctly, that the moment he slowed down was the moment Hollywood would forget him. In an industry built on the constant pursuit of the next big thing, standing still meant falling behind. By the mid-1990s, Aaron's empire had reached its peak. He had more than a dozen shows in various stages of production, from established hits to promising pilots. His company employed hundreds of writers, producers, and support staff. His annual output exceeded anything his competitors could match. Trade publications estimated his personal fortune at somewhere between $300 million and $500 million, though the true number was likely higher. The manor stood as physical proof of that success. Every gilded molding, every crystal chandelier, Every square foot of imported marble spoke to decades of relentless work and unparalleled achievement. Aaron Spelling had started with nothing and built himself into a titan. But the entertainment industry is unforgiving, and even titans eventually fall. As the decade drew to a close, the television landscape began to shift beneath Aaron's feet. Cable networks were fragmenting audiences. Streaming technology loomed on the horizon. The network model that had made Aaron wealthy was beginning to crack. More concerning still was the changing taste of viewers. The glossy escapism that had defined Aaron's career was falling out of fashion. Audiences were gravitating toward grittier fare, shows that felt more realistic and less polished. The Sopranos premiered in 1999, heralding a new era of prestige television that made Aaron's sunny melodramas seem almost quaint by comparison. Aaron tried to adapt. He developed new shows, experimented with different formats, and attempted to read the shifting winds. But the magic that had guided his career for so long seemed to be fading. New projects failed to find audiences. Network relationships that had once seemed unshakable began to fray. The man who had once owned television was suddenly struggling to find his place within it. Inside the manor, these professional setbacks remained largely invisible. The house continued to operate with the same elaborate efficiency it always had. The parties continued. The staff remained. The lifestyle that Aaron and Candy had built showed no outward signs of strain. But privately, Aaron felt the weight of changing times. He was in his 70s now, an age when most men would have long since retired. His health had begun to decline, though he shared these concerns with few people beyond Candy. The boundless energy that had driven his career was finally beginning to flag. And then there was the matter of what would happen after he was gone. The manor, the company, the fortune he had accumulated over a lifetime of work, all of it would need to pass to someone. His children, Tori and Randy, were obvious heirs, but their relationships with their parents had grown complicated over the years. Tori had married twice by this point, first to an actor named Charlie Shanahan, and then to Dean McDermott, a decision that had caused tension within the family. Her spending habits had become tabloid fodder, with stories circulating about her lavish lifestyle and mounting debts. Whether these reports were exaggerated or accurate, they created a narrative that worried her parents. Randy had largely retreated from the spotlight, working behind the scenes in production and avoiding the public scrutiny that followed his sister. His relationship with Aaron remained close, but the dynamic with Candy was more strained. The family that lived inside the largest house in Los Angeles was, in many ways, struggling with the same issues that afflict families everywhere. Money could buy extraordinary things, but it could not buy harmony. Walls could keep out the paparazzi, but they could not keep out disappointment, resentment, or the slow erosion of connection over time. As the new millennium arrived, Aaron Spelling was facing the twilight of his career and his life. He had accomplished more than almost anyone in the history of television. He had created shows that defined generations. He had built a mansion that stood as a monument to American success. But the story of the manor was far from over. In the years ahead, it would become the center of a family drama more compelling than anything Aaron had ever put on screen. There would be death and inheritance. There would be lawsuits and accusations. There would be a sale that shocked even the most jaded observers of Hollywood excess. And through it all, the house would stand, silent witness to the rise and fall of an empire built on dreams. The end came quietly, as death so often does, even for men who have lived the loudest of lives. On June 23, 2006, Aaron Spelling suffered a massive stroke inside the manor. He was 83 years old, and his body, which had carried him through decades of 18-hour workdays and the relentless pressure of running a television empire, finally gave out. Candy was at his side when he passed. So were Tori and Randy, summoned to their father's bedside as his condition deteriorated. For a few hours, at least, the family that had grown so fractured over the years was reunited in grief. They gathered in the master suite, that enormous room with its hand-painted ceilings and imported silk wallpaper, and they said goodbye to the man who had built everything around them. The news of Aaron Spelling's death made headlines around the world. Television networks interrupted their programming to announce the passing of the man who had shaped so much of what they broadcast. Tributes poured in from actors, writers, and executives who had worked with him over his 50-year career. They spoke of his generosity, his vision, and his uncanny ability to understand what audiences wanted before audiences knew it themselves. But even as the public mourned, questions began to swirl about what would happen next. Aaron Spelling had been one of the wealthiest men in entertainment. His estate was estimated at somewhere between $500 million and $600 million, a fortune built show by show, season by season, over half a century of work. And at the center of that fortune sat the manor, the house that had become as much a symbol of the Spelling legacy as any television program. The reading of the will took place shortly after Aaron's funeral. What it revealed would set in motion a family drama that would play out in tabloids and courtrooms for years to come. Candy Spelling received the bulk of the estate. This was expected. She and Aaron had been married for nearly 40 years, and under California law, she was entitled to a substantial portion of their community property, regardless of what any will might say. The manor was hers, along with the art collection, the jewelry, and the majority of the liquid assets. But it was what Tori and Randy received that sparked controversy. According to reports that leaked to the press, each of Aaron's children was left approximately $800,000. In absolute terms, this was a significant sum, more than most people would ever see in their lifetimes. But measured against an estate worth over $500 million, it was a sliver, less than 1% of their father's total wealth. Tori was devastated. She had expected, perhaps naively, that her father's fortune would be divided more generously among his heirs. The $800,000, while substantial, would barely make a dent in the debts she had accumulated over years of living far beyond her means. She had grown up in the manor, surrounded by wealth that seemed as natural and endless as the California sunshine. The idea that she would not inherit a meaningful portion of that wealth felt like a betrayal. The relationship between Tori and Candy, already strained before Aaron's death, collapsed entirely in the months that followed. Mother and daughter stopped speaking. Phone calls went unanswered. Invitations to family gatherings were declined or simply not extended. What had been a complicated but functional relationship became an open wound that neither woman seemed willing to heal. Tori began speaking publicly about her situation, first in interviews and then in a series of memoirs that laid bare the dysfunction of the Spelling family. She wrote about growing up in the manor, about feeling isolated despite being surrounded by material abundance, about a mother she described as cold and demanding. She wrote about her father with evident love, but also with a sense of confusion about why he had structured his will the way he had. The books became bestsellers, feeding a public appetite for stories about the rich and troubled. Readers devoured tales of birthday parties that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, of closets filled with clothes that still had their tags attached, of a childhood that seemed gilded from the outside, but hollow within. Tori presented herself as a survivor, a woman who had escaped the trap of inherited wealth only to find herself struggling to make her own way. Candy, for her part, remained largely silent. She declined most interview requests and let her lawyers handle any public statements. But those who knew her said she was deeply hurt by Tori's accusations, by the portrait of their family that was being painted in book after book. She had her own version of events, her own understanding of why things had happened the way they did, but she chose not to share it publicly, at least not at first. Meanwhile, the manor stood as it always had, magnificent and imposing, a monument to a marriage and a career that had now both ended. Candy continued to live there, alone except for the staff that maintained the 123 rooms. The parties that had once filled the house with Hollywood's elite grew less frequent. The screening rooms sat dark more often than not. The swimming pool, heated to its perfect temperature, was used by only one person. For Candy, the house had become something complicated. It was her masterpiece, the physical manifestation of decades of work and planning. Every room reflected her taste, her vision, her understanding of how beautiful spaces should look and feel. But it was also empty now, a palace built for entertaining that no longer had anyone to entertain. She began to consider selling. The decision did not come quickly or easily. The manor had been her home for 15 years, the place where she had raised her children and hosted her husband's colleagues and built a life that most people could not imagine. Walking away from it meant walking away from all of that, from the memories embedded in every gilded molding and crystal chandelier. But practical considerations intruded. The house cost millions of dollars each year simply to maintain. The staff alone represented a small fortune in salaries, benefits, and management. The gardens required constant attention. The systems that kept the house running, the heating and cooling, the security, the endless maintenance of a building that size, never stopped demanding resources. And there was something else, something harder to articulate. The manor had been built for two people, for Aaron and Candy together. With Aaron gone, the house felt different. The scale that had once seemed impressive now seemed excessive. The rooms that had once hosted parties now echoed with emptiness. The masterpiece had become a mausoleum. In 2009, Candy Spelling made her decision. She would sell the manor and move to a more manageable residence. The house was quietly listed with a select group of luxury real estate agents, with an asking price that made even the most seasoned brokers catch their breath. $150 million. It was the highest asking price for any home in the United States at that time, a figure that reflected not just the size and location of the property, but its unique status as a piece of American cultural history. The listing attracted immediate attention. Newspapers and magazines ran stories about the sale, accompanied by photographs that gave the public its first real glimpse inside the house. The images were staggering. The two-story closet with its automated racks and illuminated display cases. The bowling alley with its custom equipment. The gift wrapping room and the flower cutting room and the humidity-controlled fur vault. Americans had known the Spellings were wealthy. They had not understood just how wealthy until they saw those photographs. But finding a buyer proved difficult. The pool of people who could afford a $150 million home was small to begin with. The pool of people who actually wanted a 56,000 square foot French chateau in Los Angeles was even smaller. The house was extraordinary, but it was also impractical. Who needed 123 rooms? Who wanted to pay the maintenance costs on a property that size? who was willing to take on the responsibility of owning the most famous private residence in the city. The listing lingered on the market. Months passed, then years. The asking price was quietly reduced, though it remained astronomical by any normal standard. Candy continued to live in the house while she waited for a buyer, occupying a fraction of its vast space, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of her life with Aaron. And then, in 2011, a buyer finally emerged. Her name was Petra Ecclestone, and she was 22 years old. Petra was the daughter of Bernie Ecclestone, the British billionaire who controlled Formula One racing. She had grown up surrounded by wealth that rivaled even the Spellings, educated at the finest schools, dressed in the finest clothes, accustomed to a lifestyle that most people could not comprehend. She was newly married to a businessman named James Stunt, and she was looking for a home in Los Angeles where they could build their life together. When Petra first toured the manor, she was overwhelmed. The scale of the house was unlike anything she had ever seen, and she had seen a great deal. The craftsmanship was impeccable. The location was perfect. But it was the potential that excited her most. The possibility of taking this extraordinary property and making it her own. Negotiations proceeded quickly by the standards of such transactions. The final sale price was reported at $85 million, a significant discount from the original asking price, but still one of the highest amounts ever paid for a residential property in the United States. The sale closed in the summer of 2011, and Petra Ecclestone became the new owner of the manor. The transition was bittersweet for Candy Spelling. She had poured years of her life into creating the house, and walking away from it meant leaving behind more than just a building. It meant leaving behind the physical evidence of her marriage, her ambitions, her identity as half of one of Hollywood's most successful couples. She moved to a condominium in Century City, luxurious by any normal standard, but modest compared to what she had known. In interviews after the sale, Candy spoke about the manor with a mixture of pride and resignation. She was proud of what she had created, proud that the house had attracted so much attention and commanded such a price. But she was also relieved to be free of its demands, free to start a new chapter of her life without the weight of 123 rooms pressing down on her. Petra Ecclestone, meanwhile, set about transforming the manor into something new. She hired designers to update the interiors, replacing some of Candy's more traditional choices with a more contemporary aesthetic. The famous closet was redesigned. The color palettes were lightened. Modern art replaced old masters on some of the walls. The changes sparked debate among those who followed such things. Some felt that Petra was erasing the Spelling legacy, destroying the careful work that Candy had done over so many years. Others argued that any house, no matter how historic, needs to evolve with its owners, that forcing a 22-year-old to live in a 70-year-old woman's taste would be absurd. Petra herself seemed unbothered by the criticism. She threw parties that rivaled anything the Spellings had hosted, bringing a new generation of celebrities and socialites through the famous front doors. She raised her children in rooms that had once belonged to Tori and Randy Spelling. She made the manor her home in every sense of the word. But even as life continued inside those walls, the Spelling family drama played on outside them. Tori's financial troubles became increasingly public. Despite earning money from her books, her reality shows, and various business ventures, she seemed perpetually in debt. Stories circulated about unpaid bills, about moves from one rental property to another, about a lifestyle that consistently exceeded her income. The contrast with her mother could not have been sharper. Candy Spelling, even after selling the manor, remained extraordinarily wealthy. She lived comfortably in her Century City penthouse, surrounded by art and antiques from the house she had built. She continued to avoid public comment on her daughter's struggles, maintaining a dignified silence that some interpreted as cold indifference and others as admirable restraint. Tori, for her part, continued to tell her story. Each new book, each new interview, added another layer to the narrative of a family torn apart by money and resentment. She spoke of feeling abandoned by her mother, of raising her children without the support she had expected, of struggling to understand why she had been left so little when there had been so much. The public took sides. Some sympathized with Tori, seeing her as a victim of circumstances beyond her control, a woman who had never been taught how to manage money because she had never been expected to need that skill. Others viewed her less charitably, pointing to her continued spending, her multiple reality shows, her willingness to profit from family dysfunction while complaining about its effects. And through it all, the manor remained, as houses do, indifferent to the human dramas that swirl around them. Its walls had witnessed the rise of a television empire and the death of the man who built it. They had seen family unity and family collapse, celebrations and mourning, the passing of ownership from one generation of wealth to another. In 2019, Petra Ecclestone decided to sell. Her marriage to James Stunt had ended in a contentious divorce, and the manor, like so many grand houses, had become associated with a chapter of life she wanted to close. The property was listed for $200 million, reflecting both the appreciation of Los Angeles real estate and the improvements Petra had made during her ownership. The sale attracted the usual attention. Once again, photographs of the interiors circulated through media outlets, this time showing the changes Petra had made. The house looked different than it had under Candy's ownership, more modern, more youthful, but no less impressive. The scale remained overwhelming. The craftsmanship remained impeccable. The history remained unique. A buyer was eventually found, though the final price was not publicly disclosed. What is known is that the manor remains a private residence, still the largest home in Los Angeles, still a monument to the ambitions of those who built it and those who have owned it since. Aaron Spelling has been gone for nearly 2 decades now. His television shows, which once dominated the airwaves, have largely faded from memory. New generations have grown up without knowing who produced Beverly Hills 90210 or Dynasty or Charlie's Angels. The rhythms of entertainment have changed so completely that his style of programming seems almost quaint, a relic of an era when families gathered around a single television set and watched whatever the networks chose to broadcast. But the manor endures. It stands on its hill in Holmby Hills, visible from certain angles to passing cars, its French chateau silhouette unmistakable against the California sky. Inside its walls, life continues as it has for more than 3 decades, though the names and faces have changed. Staff maintain the gardens, systems hum along. The swimming pool stays at its perfect temperature. Candy Spelling, now in her late 70s, remains in Los Angeles. Her relationship with Tori has reportedly thawed somewhat over the years, though it will likely never fully heal. The wounds inflicted by money and inheritance, by public accusations and private silences, run too deep for complete reconciliation. But there have been gestures, moments of connection, suggestions that blood might ultimately prove thicker than resentment. Tori continues to work, to struggle, to tell her story in whatever format will have her. She has become, in her own way, as much a symbol of something as her father was. Where Aaron represented the possibility of building an empire from nothing, Tori represents the difficulty of inheriting one. Her story is a cautionary tale about the expectations that come with famous names and the weight of living in shadows cast by giants. And Randy, the son who largely stayed out of the spotlight, has found his own peace away from the glare of publicity. He works in the industry his father dominated, though on a smaller scale, building a career on his own terms rather than his father's. The manor stands as the physical culmination of Aaron Spelling's American dream. A poor boy from Dallas who could not walk for a year of his childhood grew up to build the largest private home in Los Angeles. He filled it with treasures from around the world, hosted the most powerful people in entertainment, and created a life of almost unimaginable luxury. But the house also stands as a reminder of what wealth cannot buy. It could not buy family harmony. It could not buy health or longevity. It could not buy protection from the ordinary tragedies and disappointments that touch every human life, no matter how gilded. When visitors drive past the manor today, if they even know what they are looking at, they see a house. They see walls and windows, gates and gardens, the physical evidence of success beyond measure. What they cannot see are the stories those walls contain, the laughter and the tears, the celebrations and the arguments, the lives lived and lost within them. Aaron Spelling once said that his job was to give people an escape from their ordinary lives, to transport them into worlds more exciting and glamorous than their own. In building the manor, he created the ultimate expression of that philosophy, a house so extraordinary that it seemed to exist in a different reality entirely. But reality, as Aaron learned, and as his family learned after him, has a way of intruding even into the most carefully constructed fantasies. The manor was built as a dream house, a place where everything was perfect and beautiful and exactly as it should be. Yet the people who lived there experienced the same heartaches, the same disappointments, the same family fractures that touch people in homes a fraction of its size. Perhaps that is the true lesson of the manor. Not that wealth can build extraordinary things, though it certainly can. Not that ambition can achieve remarkable success, though that too is true. But that no house, no matter how large or how beautiful or how carefully designed, can shelter its occupants from the fundamental challenges of being human. The walls remain, the chandeliers still sparkle, the gardens still bloom in their perfect patterns. But the man who built it is gone, and the family he hoped it would hold together has scattered to the winds. The manor stands as his monument, magnificent and melancholy, a palace built on dreams that proved, in the end, to be as fragile as any other. And somewhere in that house, in one of those 123 rooms, the ghost of Aaron Spelling's ambition still lingers. The poor boy from Dallas who dreamed of castles built the biggest one of all. Whether that was triumph or tragedy, whether the manor represents the fulfillment of the American dream or its hollow center, depends entirely on who is telling the story. What cannot be disputed is this: the house remains, and as long as it stands on that hill, catching the California light, it will carry within it the echoes of everything that happened there. The parties and the funerals, the laughter and the silence, the rise of an empire and the fracturing of a family. Some nights, when the fog rolls in from the Pacific and settles over the hills of Holmby Hills, the manor seems to float above the world like something from one of Aaron's television shows. Its lights glow through the mist, warm and golden, promising secrets and stories within. Passers-by who catch a glimpse might wonder what it would be like to live there, to wake up in one of those bedrooms, to walk those marble halls, to have access to all that space and all that beauty. They imagine perfection. They imagine happiness purchased with money. They imagine lives free from the concerns that trouble ordinary people. But if those walls could speak, they would tell a different story. They would speak of a man who worked himself nearly to death building an empire, only to leave behind a family that could not hold together without him. They would speak of a woman who created something beautiful and then had to watch it pass into other hands. They would speak of children who grew up with everything except perhaps the thing they needed most. The manor is many things. It is an architectural achievement. It is a real estate legend. It is a symbol of American success at its most extravagant. But above all, it is a house. And like all houses, it is only as meaningful as the lives lived within it. Aaron Spelling understood stories better than almost anyone who ever worked in television. He knew that audiences did not tune in for happy endings alone. They tuned in for conflict, for struggle, for the messy complications of human relationships. They wanted to see people fight for what they loved and sometimes lose. They wanted drama that felt real even when everything else about the production was fantasy. In the end, his own life provided exactly that kind of story. The triumph and the tragedy, the creation and the loss, the family that came together and fell apart, the house that stood as both monument and mausoleum. That is the forgotten story of Aaron Spelling's $150 million mega mansion. Hollywood's biggest house, built by Hollywood's most prolific dreamer, haunted by the dreams that both made it possible and could never quite make it whole.